Our reading today is from Laughing Bird, Psalm 14. Heartless, mindless scum kid themselves that there is no God. They are corrupt and callous. The things that they do would make you sick. There is not an ounce of good among them. The Lord scans the human race one at a time, looking for any who are still wise, for even one who still has a heart for God. But it is like looking for a needle in a haystack. They're all lost. They've all lost the plot. Everyone is caught up in their own perverse ways, every last one of them. Don't they know what all this will get them? They never look to the Lord for anything. They chew up God's people and spit them out. But it will soon be their turn to cringe in fear, because God sides with those who play straight. If you think you can trample the dreams of the battlers, watch out. The Lord will be there for them. We can hardly wait to hear the songs of freedom as justice marches down from the God's mountain. What a day it will be when the Lord redistributes the wealth and God's people are compensated for their suffering. Our ancestors will rise up with joy. The streets will fill with singing and dancing. Our scriptural reading today is from the Ephesians 3:14 through 21. For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, for whom every family in heaven and on earth takes its name. I pray that, according to the riches of his glory, he may grant that you may be strengthened in your inner being with power through his Spirit, and that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, as you are being rooted and grounded in love. I pray that you may have the power to comprehend with all the saints, with what is the breadth, the length, the height, and the depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, so that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. Now to him who be the power at work within us is able to accomplish abundantly far more than all we could ask or imagine. To him be glory in church and in Jesus Christ to all generations, forever and ever. Amen.
So I want to acknowledge something this morning. Yeah, I think I'm on. Test. Am I on? There we go. What I want to acknowledge is that this is tough times for us this week. I talked to Pastor Janice McAllister, the pastor of our sister church in Paradise yesterday, just to see how she was doing, and she said, we are struggling. And I imagine not only are the folks that are still up on the ridge struggling, but anybody who has been through the campfire or any number of fires that we have had here since that time. This is especially hard because our anger is not necessarily directed to a corporate entity like PG&E. It is to an individual who set this fire. And so I want to just be honest with my struggle today. But I also want to assure people that this is called a sanctuary for a reason. Okay, this is a sanctuary where we can gather together as the people of God and leave all of those things that need to be left out there. This is a place that is safe. It is a place where we are at refuge with God in our midst. So, with that, let us dig into this scripture that Dave read for us this morning. Here's an old saying that you don't hear much anymore. Make yourself at home. You don't hear that much, you know. It's one of those old-timey greetings that folks used to say to guests who were visiting their homes. Visitor rings the doorbell, and the host answers the door. Maybe it's somebody that the host was expecting. Maybe it was somebody who's in town just dropping by. Might even be a first-time visitor. Who knows? Doesn't matter. The host greets the guest, invites them in, and says, "Make yourself at home." I want you to think about that phrase for a second, because that's a heck of a thing to say to a person visiting your living space, right? Make yourself at home. Okay, so what if the guest says, "Why, thank you," and then kicks off their shoes, walks into your kitchen, opens up the fridge, makes themselves a snack, come on back, sits on your couch, feet up on the couch, flips on the TV and watches, I don't know, Andy Griffith's show, Ted Lasso, Game of Thrones, who knows, whatever. Maybe that's why people don't use that greeting anymore. Could you imagine if that happened to you? You know, sure, maybe if it's a close family. I mean, when our adult children come home, that you expect that to happen. But it makes you want to stop and think about what you're going to say before you actually say it. Early on in my faith journey, I was told by a pastor of a church that I was attending that when we decide to follow Jesus, we invite him into our hearts. In fact, the one church that I was attending actually had a song that we sang when the pastor gave the invitation for anyone who wanted to become a Christian. It was called "Make My Heart Your Home." And the chorus was, "Make my heart your own, take it as your own, light the fire and warm this house with perfect peace. Love is overdue and so I welcome you. Come inside and make my heart your home." Aw. Clearly this was up in Oregon. Light the fire and warm the house with perfect peace doesn't work so well down here. But the pastor of that church would also explain that inviting Jesus into our hearts was more than just inviting him in for a visit. And he'd say, think about what you do when you know you're going to have a visitor. You get ready, especially if it's an important guest. You clean your house. You make sure that things are in order. You make a mental checklist. You know that guest is going to be coming to the living room, or the sitting room, as they call it in the South. And you do your best to clean it, but lo and behold, there is an exercise bike sitting there in the living room. Amen. You do your best to get around it, but no, there it is, because somebody dragged it out, or you might have dragged it out to pedal while you binge watch Bridgerton. You know you can't have that bike in the sitting room. When Jesus comes over, because he might stub his toe on it. This is all hypothetical, by the way. This is no truth in this at all. So you put that bike in the other room. Does anybody else have another room in their house? The other room, where things just get piled up when you can't figure out what to do with it. And then you think, uh-oh, we're going to be having dinner, so I better clean the dining room table off too. Except you've been using your dining room table to work on a project that uses all sorts of gadgets and tools and things like that. I wanted to be fair and even with that, Mary, just so, I'm not pointing fingers or anything, because my daughter-in-law and I use that table too much. And so you don't have time to put all this stuff back where it belongs, so you put it in the other room. The junk room? Yeah, the other room. With the exercise bike, right? And then it occurs to you that it's likely your guest will need to use the bathroom at some point during the visit, so you walk into the bathroom and there's all this drip-dry only laundry hanging on the shower curtain rod, towel racks, and so you grab them and put them in the other room. This is where the pastor of the church clearly had an agenda, because he ramped up the stakes of the illustration. He talked about how the host goes through all the rooms in the house that the guest might visit, but there's a variety of things in each of these rooms that are either going to be in the way or that might even be embarrassing. And so you keep putting all these things in the other room until you have to lean on the door to get that other room to shut. And then the doorbell rings. You open the door, there's Jesus. And you say, come on in and make yourself at home. Exactly. But Jesus is the guest who takes you literally, okay? And in this illustration, Jesus goes to each one of the rooms in your house, and according to this pastor, makes little comments that oddly sound more like issues the pastor had rather than Jesus, you know. Like, well, I noticed that you have the whole Harry Potter collection in your video library. Interesting. Then he goes into the kitchen, opens up the fridge and says, my, oh my, you must do a lot of cooking with beer. Goes into the bathroom and says, you know, it's better to use natural loofah sponges than synthetic ones. See, this church believes in judgy Jesus, okay? So, and then judgy Jesus goes to the garage and says, you know, Consumer Report says that Milwaukee tools are better than DeWalt tools, and you might want to think about that the next time you go to Lowe's, or I should say Home Depot, since this is judgy Jesus. But anyway, as you might guess, Jesus saves the other room for last. And of course, you don't want Jesus to see everything you've crammed into that room, because you already messed up because you didn't catch the Harry Potter thing or the beer in the fridge. So, you know, you say, no, Jesus, you really don't want to go into that room. But Jesus says, I do. Because remember, you said, make yourself at home. You've got to show me everything. And so you open the other room door, and of course everything comes crashing down and spilling out into the house. And in an act of contrition, you say, Jesus, I'm so sorry that I tried to hide all these things from you now, because look, we have such a big mess. I've got such a mess here. And Jesus says, then let's work together to clean this mess up. Jesus is no longer a visitor. He is now one who lives in your heart. Are there problems with this illustration? Yes. Again, Jesus sounds a whole lot more like the pastor than the Jesus who portrayed in the Bible, but you know what? It's a pretty darn good illustration, isn't it? Once you sift through the borderline creepy manipulative parts, but it goes along with what we've been talking about in Ephesians when it comes to becoming a family or a household of God. Because the section that neighbor Dave read this morning talks about Paul offering a prayer within the text of this letter that he has written to the church in Ephesus. His prayer is an acknowledgement that it's really hard to grasp the extent and the breadth and the depth of the love of God. It's hard to define. It's hard to put into words. But he says that on the journey towards figuring it out, we will be strengthened by God's Spirit to receive inner strength, and that Christ will make his home in our hearts. And so this prayer is about people coming to terms with themselves and discovering God's resources. It's about a church coming to an understanding of who they are and finding God in their midst. It's not a prayer about a vision statement or mission statement or goals and strategies. It's not about being a purpose-driven church or about adopting a particular model of church growth. And I'm not saying that those tools aren't useful in ministry, but they aren't always very helpful when it comes to showing people how to discover or rediscover God. When we use these church growth tools and strategies, we're usually hoping that the institution will be strengthened. But when we focus on discovering God first, our inner selves will be strengthened. Yes, there are a time and place for these church growth tools. But when that becomes our focus, I tell you, it breeds defensiveness, comparisons, church game playing, avoidance, blaming, fear. And it has a snowball effect on others because it creates all these blurring of boundaries that often get those people who are in leadership positions into trouble. So Paul uses this phrase, inner being, in verse 16. And that causes some people to say, that sounds really new agey, Pastor. Okay, that could be. I get that. But the inner work that Paul is talking about here in Ephesians involves healthy self-reflection and healthy self-esteem, and it enables us to appreciate others without fear. It creates space for others to be themselves and to know how to express their gifts. And to be honest, this has a snowball effect too, right? The more we understand about the love of God, the more strength we'll sense in our inner being. And the better we feel about who we are, the more we're able to catch a glimpse of that extent of God's love for us. And someone might say, "What are you talking about, Pastor? We're not supposed to feel good about ourselves. That is not the way of the church. We're supposed to feel ashamed of our sin." No, not according to what we read here this morning in Ephesians, or the whole book of Ephesians, or the New Testament for that matter. Paul's prayer for his friends in Ephesus is that they will be given the ability to be strong in their inner being. Christian faith is concerned with strengthening, growing, freeing, and getting in touch with our inner world. It's easy to get caught up in being active and busy and in our church work. But if these things happen at the expense of what it means, what it meant to happen within us, we're just robbing the very center of our spiritual life. If we are to grow strong within, we got to take time to look inside, become acquainted with ourselves and our feelings, and then value that person that we find. And this takes prayer. Prayer is something that we talk a lot about in the disciples, but we need to do more than just talk about it. We need to take time to enter our inner world and listen to that still, small voice of God, which then strengthens and fortifies us as individuals and as the church. Listening to this voice can bring a word of grace, not demand. God is delighted when we listen and learn. God doesn't require us to be out there running around trying to earn bonus points or whatever. God graciously accepts us wherever we are and loves us as we are. But for some reason, we find this very difficult to believe or even accept. We are, in fact, created in the image of God. And that image has been placed in every human being. And guess what? God doesn't make junk. God's love has no bounds. We can be angry with God and God will not reject us. If you don't believe me, read the book of Jonah. That's what that whole book is about. We can be lazy and God will not reject us. And if you don't believe me, read Matthew 26 or Mark 14, where Jesus' disciples choose to take a nap instead of praying with him like he asked them to do. And you know what? God still loved them. Yes, we get lost sometimes, but God will not give up on us. God offers words of freedom, not bondage. God calls us to growth, not stagnation. God offers reconciliation, not alienation. During the early years of my faith journey, and I guess even in the early years of my ministry, I had this false notion that the Christian life was all about starving, denying, and imprisoning that which was in the inner world. I was led to believe that we were supposed to suppress our feelings without acknowledging them. I thought I was supposed to feel guilty if I felt good about anything. And because of this, I was tempted to pass this guilt on to others when they didn't see things my way or do it my way. I mean, why should I be miserable all by myself, right? But what I was missing was grace. And this is why I share preacher secrets with you all, so that I don't abuse my pastoral position here. Faith without grace is pointless. Okay? This is something that I had to learn because every new day contains evidence that God's love is bigger than my ability to comprehend. I had to look for it, and I had to be willing to receive it. Paul's prayer from our text today is to grant the church in Ephesus and the church throughout history the power to be strong in our inner selves as we learn to be grounded in love. And it is okay to do this. A fortified inner self not only enables person to offer love properly, but also to receive love properly, without all the strings and reservations or suspicions that we put on that sometimes. And in that way, we can invite Christ into our hearts without the awkwardness of feeling like we have to run around and scramble to prepare our hearts ahead of time. We invite Christ in knowing that he will help us get our houses in order from the get-go so that we can know the fullness, the height, the breadth, the depth of God's love.